close. Hey, we are live. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to the BAMP podcast. I am your host, Mike Lafferty, and here is our contractually obligated intro music. Now that lovely musical triumph you just listened to assures you, gentle viewer, that you are now experiencing a high quality podcast, a high production value operation, no AI content, none of that, rage bait Chinese manufactured stuff. This is pure homegrown American made geeky conversation for your podcast listening pleasure. And tonight,
Chuck, totally legit. He really is in a parking lot somewhere right now. We're not cheating at it.
Yeah, I'm actually broadcasting from my minivan outside the 7-Eleven while I'm on my smoke break. So don't be fooled by this glacial environment. So, Mr. Bob Greenberger, who is an alum of both Marvel and DC Comics, as well as the parking authority of a small town in Connecticut, graciously agreed to come talk on our little podcast again. And Bob, it is a pleasure to have you. Thank you, sir.
Nice to be back. How are you guys doing?
Oh, we're all right. I neglected to introduce my co-hosts. Below me in the Brady Bunch grid is Mr. Chuck Rice, a luminary for a well-known name in the world of tabletop RPGs. How you doing, Chuck?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And over here is Christopher McLaughlin, who is the guy in charge of Ghost Show Press, where they put out lots of anthologies of interesting movie criticism. In fact, we're kickstarting one right now, and I'm sure we'll mention in the show notes. So Chris, thanks for coming out. Appreciate you having me here tonight.
You're very welcome. It's a nice break from explaining 18-year-olds the difference between Thomas Hobbes and John Locke.
Is this your last year as a political science professor at a high school there in Virginia?
I thought it might be, but circumstances have chained me to the rock for at least a couple more years. So.
Yeah, you and me both. I got a few more years at high school.
No, my sympathies, sir.
Guys, in a Tarantino script, this is where we would start talking about the heist that would free us all.
So Kickstarter then?
For Kickstarter. Bob, you are also you're a teacher right now?
Well, I go back on Monday, so the school year is we're gearing up. I've been doing planning for the last week or two. So yeah, looking forward to it in some ways.
Oh, I understand. Well, hey, just right off the bat, you had famous runs at both Marvel and DC. Just to get a fanboy question off the top, do you have any particular, storylines you're particularly proud of, or funny anecdotes you'd like to break out about the time in the industry? Or
funny anecdotes. I mean, that's the kind of thing where when I catch up with former colleagues at a convention, that's when the memory gets really, shaken, where all the cobwebs vanish. Favorite storylines. I mean, gotta say, the first 18 months of Suicide Squad with John Ostrander and Luke McDonnell was just wonderful. We did 1 and 2 part stories, but we had running gags and threads throughout that. But we probably reached the peak in the early 20s with the Senator not Adam Cray, he was the Adam, but the shooting of the Senator story. Grant Morrison's first storyline in the Doom Patrol with Richard Case and Scott Hanna. So some of that, and there were some of the Star Trek stories that were also particularly fun.
All right, cool. We're here today because you are kickstarting a new anthology called Ripping Adventure Yarns, and we should mention you've been doing this for several years now. And before I forget, we have a tiny URL to take people right to your Kickstarter, tinyurl.com/Ray for Ripping Adventure Yarns 2025. 14 days left, I believe, and you guys are over halfway there, over 150 backers. So congratulations, you've got a nice head of steam there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The previous 3 books, I usually get around 400 backers, so I'm pretty much on target. I'd like to get to goal and beyond a little faster because I've got some exciting stretch goals I would like to get to. That would include adding illustrations to the book, because even though it's a paperback, I'm trying to make it look and feel as much like an old pulp magazine as possible. And the pulp magazines had some fabulous illustrations, not just on the cover. So I want to give you, the readers as complete an experience as possible. And I've got a lot of people I want to tap to do this. So I hope I get there. If not, then I've got 15 great stories coming up.
Yeah, sometimes I joke that the Kickstarters I do are just mainly to afford my art budget. But well, tell us about Ripping Adventure Yarns. I'm sorry, Thrilling Adventure Yarns. That R is pointless in my tiny URL. It should be Tay 2020.
Oh, good.
So
around when I was 10, 12 years old, it was a really rich period for the paperback houses to be doing paperback editions of the old pulp stories. So this is when the Robert E. Howard Conan stuff started to see print just before the Marvel comic. And it's when, I guess it was Bantam doing the Shadow and Doc Savage collections. And then there was the Spider and G8 and all. Yeah, and I was reading a lot of that stuff. And by the time I hit high school, one of the local FM stations started to broadcast at 7 p.m. old-time radio shows. And as I was listening to the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger and the crime shows and all, I was reading up on them and suddenly discovering that a lot of them were pulp inspired. Certainly Shadow got his origins through the pulps. So, and the old-time radio, there's an interesting connection there. But, so I on top of my comic book habit, I was reading a lot of this stuff and really fascinated by this era of stuff that I clearly missed as a kid. So when I was thinking about something to do as an anthology for Crazy 8 Press, the digital press hub I'm part of, I decided I wanted to do a tribute to the pulps. And the first Kickstarter did so well, I've come back for 3 more.
Nice. Well, it's a lot of fun. And I see you have Christopher Priest. He's a great writer. And Dan Abnett has been on this particular podcast like 5 times. He's a heck of a nice man.
Well, the thing is, it's a Crazy 8 Press book, so I always invite the Crazy 8 Press people. Do they want to contribute or not? And this time around, I was able to get most of us. And then I open it up to other people. And this time I wanted a clean sweep. I didn't want any repeat outside writers. And I found these great people, including comic book veterans like Christopher Priest and Elliot Maggott. And Dan Abnett has always toggled between prose and comic book stuff. But Charles Ardai is a name not everyone will recognize, but if you know his hard case crime comics and novels that come from Titan Books, he created that line, sold it to Titan, and continues to edit and write for them. And so here's a chance for me to get some good original crime fiction from him. He certainly knows the era. Then the others, Liz Braswell is known to a lot of readers for her young adult Disney princess novels, but I know she's capable of far more than that. And this is a chance for her to stretch a little bit and work with a different audience. People like Bobby Nash and Win Scott Eckert are veterans in writing in the pulp field, either original or licensed material. I know Win has done a bunch of Burroughs-related material. Jeff Marriott worked at Wildstorm, has done a ton of licensed and original fiction, just completed a successful Kickstarter for a Western anthology that Crazy 8 will be publishing in early 2025. So he asked to do a sword and sorcery story again for him, a change of pace. And then I was recommended to a science fiction author by the name of William F. Wu, who I was largely unfamiliar with until the recommendation, and he gleefully accepted the opportunity and came up with a real fun story.
Wu, one of Wu's stories, Wong's Lost and Found Emporium, was the source material for a severely underrated Twilight Zone episode that I've always been very, very, very fond of. And I've sort of carried that around in my heart for years. And then, of all things, I went back and looked at the 70s run of Shang-Chi comics. and found that he's on like every single letters page there before
Well,
he
if you read,
and then seeing the comic roots for him made me smile.
He there was a book, I forget the author's name at the moment, but there's somebody who read every Marvel comic book and wrote a book about it. And when it gets to the Shang-Chi chapter, it's all about William Wu's letters.
Yeah, they're great.
That is really cool. So you've got some interesting stretch goals. Looks like 12,500 is bookmarks. And who doesn't love a bookmark?
Well, it's something extra. It's relatively inexpensive, so I can make some additional money to get me closer to being able to pay printing and shipping and the authors and my designer and so on. What I really, and on top of the fully illustrated, I've got 2 surprise stretch goals I would love to sneak in here in between these tiers that I think will make the book even stronger than it currently is. But I'm not announcing them yet until I get there.
I have some really cool stuff, but I'm not going to tell you about it.
They're surprises.
They're surprises.
Yeah, and then if I'm, if I reached the 19,000, which would be amazing. Trying something new this time, which is the book club. 6 months after the book is in everyone's hands, I will do a virtual book club with some of the authors, and we'll talk about the stories and invitation only.
That is a really cool premium. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. So, all right, nice. I'm gonna back this, and I encourage everyone listening to, because it looks like it'll be a great time. And you kind of stealth announced that if you get that bookmark, it's kind of hidden in there, but you're gonna autograph these books if you reach that the bookmark level.
Yeah, usually I time the book's release to one of the conventions a number of the authors are going to be at. It's either Far Point in just outside of Baltimore or Shore Leave, which is now out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we'll just sit in a hotel room and pass books back and forth, and I'll get the requisite autographs, and then I'll be able to ship them all out.
Yeah, nice.
Party of it.
Have you ever? I find myself listening to more and more audiobooks, or just that kind of I've been listening to old radio serials on FM just because I got a kid, so I'm driving everywhere in the afternoon, and it cuts into my recreational reading time. What have you guys ever considered doing some of that with?
We look into audio, but it's expensive to get quality readers and the actual producer to record it and edit it and put it together. I mean, you're talking a few $100s an hour of recorded work, and it's usually, if it's a 10-hour book, it's about 20 hours of recording. 20 times, say $300. That adds up.
It adds up. Yeah, this is true.
I mean, I would love to do audiobooks, especially with multiple narrators for an anthology like mine, or some of the other Crazy 8 Press authors have been looking into doing it for them, and it's just cost prohibitive. I mean, I'd much rather Audible come to me and go, "We'll pay you to license that."
Yeah, that would be nice. And I updated the tiny URL because I'm a consummate professional. It's now tinyurl.com/tay2025.
There. Excellent. Thank you.
We're thrilling adventure yarns. This isn't a sloppy operation, sir. We're high production values here. So this is practically Netflix. That close. So Chuck, you've been quiet, sir. You got any questions for Mr. Greenberger?
So I was wondering, what is it like? Because when I first saw the Kickstarter, I assumed it was going to be reprints. Because like a lot of times when people do something with the pulps, it's like a nostalgia play. So what's it like writing new pulp stories today?
A lot of it is through the prism of nostalgia. The pulp writers back in the day were pounding it out by the pound to make a buck.
They were dream
because the publishers at the time were just, we're paying anywhere from half a cent to 3 cents a word. And you would have to write thousands and thousands of words every month and hope that most of them sold.
Yeah.
The really successful people like Walter B. Gibson writing as Maxwell Grant on the Shadow Books. he had like 3 typewriters as an apartment, and he would just pound away at one story. And when he got tired on that story, the keys were starting to melt or something, he moved to the next typewriter and just keep going. And they were churning them out. It wasn't much of a happy lifestyle, and quality was not always there. Today we remember, Clark Ashton Smith and Ed Hamilton and Lester Dent and the really top-notch writers whose work have endured and gets collected. But there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other people who just filled the magazines and never really got acclaim or recognition. So when we're doing a book like this, we're bringing, maybe we're trying for our A game. We're certainly going to settle for our B+ game because it's the pulp and you're writing in a particular style, and maybe you're trying to replicate it, so you're writing it fast. So it's interesting because we're doing it out of affection, and we're doing it with our understanding what a good pulp story is. Unless you grew up on it, unless you were buying those, dime magazines back in the 30s and 40s, it's a whole other experience.
Yeah. And so, do the writers, do they try to almost like put themselves into that mindset of, being Robert E. Howard in Texas, trying to churn one of these out?
I would think most of them try and imagine what it must have been like. I don't think any of them are writing with the red hot speed of those guys. I'm also limiting everyone to 5,000 words to make it, keep the book affordable.
Yeah.
So most people can do a good 5,000 word story in a few days as opposed to a few hours. And I'm willing to take it that way.
Yeah.
There are definitely people who were very successful in the pulps who transitioned over to the comics and did a really nice job. And then there were some who didn't start in the pulps who picked up that habit. And I'm thinking of Robert Kanigher, who apparently could just sit at the typewriter over lunch and knock out, a couple of 8-page stories for, the war books or the Western books, whatever he needed to fill. And there was always a script waiting for the artist, which was great for the artist. But, I think it did him some harm with the volume he wound up doing.
Yeah. I once went to a seminar with Julie Schwartz, and Julie said that somebody bailed on a deadline, and Kanigher wrote the first Metal Men story in something like less than 48 hours.
The story was that there was because Showcase was a rotating title and went from editor to editor. Somewhere along the way, the next issue hadn't been assigned to anybody, and they just realized it. So Kanigher did go home, and while he was sitting in his car waiting to pick up somebody or an appointment or something, he was thinking about it and came up with the idea of the Metal Men and quickly looked up the various elements he needed and did knock out that script. And Monday morning walked in for Ross Andrew and said, "Here you go."
Amazing.
That's just insanity. And like a lot of old comics and old pulps, they read like dream journals. Like they read like the guy took like a 45-minute nap and just woke up but I'm sure there's a lot more craft into it than that, but they just seem so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, Kanigher learned his craft back in the 40s, and the stories were shorter, and he knew how to construct the story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then he became a volume guy because he had the skills down. When we went to book length stories, the joke at DC back in the day was that, when Kanigher got to like page 15, 16, and he still had 6 more to go, there'd be a dinosaur suddenly. Or, a plane would show up out of nowhere, just, something he didn't anticipate because he needed to fill out the issue.
The Dashiell Hammett rule: whenever you're stuck, just have somebody walk into the room with a gun.
There's you read enough comics or any kind of fiction, you notice. I don't want to pick on Warren Ellis, but there were some books he was writing at one point in time. I was like, well, he's doing a lot of splash pages in here, isn't he? We got to get to those 22 pages somehow.
Sometimes you're writing for your artist, and the artist wants to draw big.
Yeah.
And there was, a real stretch in the first decade of this century where, stuff that would take us one issue was suddenly taking 6 because you were opening everything up, and every scene was taking a long time, and you were getting splashes and double splashes. And, those of us from an earlier generation were going, what is this decompressed storytelling? But it was selling, so who could say? It's just, the old curmudgeons in us.
Yeah, it's things have definitely changed. I still read comics today, but I do sometimes miss being able to, have a one and done story and not have to, follow it for several months. But
back during my tenure as an editor at DC, I really fell into the belief that you need a rhythm and a pattern to your books, so they can't all be 6-issue stories. You need a 2-off, you need a 1-off, you need a 3-parter. Maybe build up to something big. Roy Thomas and I were paired up. Mike Gold was working with him on a Shazam revival that never saw print. And Roy was going to do a 12-part story for first year. And I said, no. And I gave him my theory, and I said, it's the first year of the book. You got to introduce it. Take your time. Give us some one and dones so we can see the character strutting his stuff, and we understand how Captain Marvel's going to fit in 1980s DC, and then build up to a 3 or 4-parter at the end of the first year. So you're building up to a crescendo. And if we're canceled after a year, we finish on a high note. And he actually bought the argument, and then it never happened. So, just things moved on.
Fair enough. Is it all Bendis' fault, or is it a bigger movement within the industry? We can blame Straczynski too, maybe.
No, it's not. It's not any one person's fault. I think somebody did it, and somebody else noticed it and said, hey, that's cool. Let me try it. And it was a lot more organic. I would think because some of these people were doing it for Marvel, I think maybe, Bill Jemas and Joe Quesada liked that kind of storytelling, especially Bill, who would take 6 issues and collect them. So to him, a 6-part story was perfect.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, everything goes in waves, right? So it was different. It felt more cinematic, even though, all of us old heads would occasionally be frustrated and be like, the original Flash was 15 pages. What is happening?
Right. On the other hand, Brian, to his credit in Ultimate Spider-Man, let the characters have conversations that would be 2 panels previously that would go on for a couple pages. I mean, some of the stuff between Peter and Mary Jane right before she discovered his identity, he had great character stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Now, did Mark Bagley like 6 pages of people talking to each other? I don't know. But as a reader, I thought it was fun. It's certainly different.
Fair enough. Hey, do you mind if I mention Crazy 8 Press?
Please mention www.crazy8press.com.
There it is, right beneath you right now, sir. Crazy8press.com. Let me share the page because you've got a beautiful website.
Thanks. We're doing some redesigns, but right now, Crazy 8, we have something 70, 80 different titles from all of our various writers and a couple of outside people we invited to publish through us. We are 11 strong writers now. We just added Christopher D. Abbott this summer as our latest inmate, as we like to refer to it. So, we run the gamut here. We've got some YA fantasy stuff from Paul Kupperberg and Mike Friedman. We've got science fiction, hard-boiled detective stories from Russ Colchimero. Peter David's, he's got his funny vampires. He just did a Robin Hood story, as you can see, Robin of Sherwood there. Aaron Rosenberg has his Duck Bob stories about a man with a duck's head and his cosmic adventures. We've done anthologies on a variety of topics. And for comic fans, Paul Kupperberg has done a couple of collections of interviews with comics creators from the 80s and 90s. And he just did a memoir panel by panel about his time in the comics field. So there's something for everybody.
That's a great title, panel by panel, because comics have panels and so do conventions. That's nifty.
We try.
Nice. Well, hey, just one more time for the folks who might have just joined us. tinyurl.com/tay2025. That's the Kickstarter. Thrilling Adventure Yarns, kickstarting for 2 more weeks. And jump on the bandwagon now. Help Bob get his pictures.
Please. Because, for those unfamiliar with Kickstarter, it's all or nothing. So
Yeah.
I'm looking for 11,000, which is my minimum to cover paying the authors, designer, cover artist, printing, shipping. If I don't get 11,000, there's no book.
Yeah, Chris and I are in a similar situation right now, so I can feel your angst on that one.
What are you doing?
Well, Chris, I'll share the screen if you want to talk about it.
Oh, I feel bad about talking my stuff when we're here to talk.
Fine, you're on the screen with us.
Well, all right, I'll give you the short version because I did not come on here to steal anybody else's thunder, but yeah, we're working on a 4th collection of essays about overlooked, underrated, underserved movies. We're kind of aiming for people that live in a world where you can basically stream or DVD any film ever made that they still have prints of, and it's so overwhelming you don't know where to start. So it's our chance to advocate for movies that have some sort of remarkable, groundbreaking, rule-breaking, innovative trait about it. And I've rounded up the weirdest collection of writers that I can, and coming at a general topic from like 30-40 directions. I think our apotheosis may have been in our last book, Fantastic Flops, when one of my authors, Justin Achille, did the 80s action film Streets of Fire, and he opens up with a little playlet, which is what he thinks the cocaine party where the film was first conceived was like. And it features the line, hey, has anybody made Zardoz yet? Can we make Zardoz? And it just gets weirder from there. And so, yeah, we have everything from like serious film scholars to Gen X 90s movie riffers like me, rather taking a reverent/irreverent look at very strange films. And oh gosh, well, yeah, there's the next one, Transgressive Horror Resurrected, where we're talking about everything from Haxan to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So,
yes, of course.
Appreciate your support. And now let's put the attention back on Mr. Greenberger.
Well, actually, one question, Professor.
Oh, please.
Have you guys covered busting?
Looking to get that into a future book. That's one I would seriously love to talk about.
Because to me, that's an underrated Elliot Gould crime story.
Oh yeah, well, I'm such a sucker for seven. I mean, I grew up thinking all movies were 70s movies. I feel really weird if I see something and it isn't about a weirdo outsider who's eventually crushed by the system. Yeah.
For whatever reason, that I saw that on cable in the 70s, and I was like, this is really good, but nobody else ever saw it apparently.
Well, listen, Mike apparently knows how to get in touch with you. The next time I'm putting one of these over, if you'd like to give us between 2,000 and 3,000 words on that, I'd be honored to publish it.
We'll talk.
Awesome.
Sounds good. And let me just throw it out there since I've got it. The tiny URL for this project is tinyurl.com/ghost show. That's the name of Chris's company. THR for Transgressive Horror Resurrected, because I like those 3-letter acronyms. So
I like that. It looks Scandinavian and threatening.
Yeah, it looks like something you'd buy at IKEA and spend an afternoon trying to assemble. I had this idea once about writing a team of Scandinavian superheroes or villains, and I would just walk through the aisles of IKEA picking up names, end tables and sofas. But well, stories for another time. Mr. Greenberger, it has been a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for coming back. And
I have one more question before we let him go.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. As an inveterate collector of Star Trek trivia, can you tell us the weirdest note you ever got from Paramount while working on Trek comics?
Oh, some were not pleasant. Weirdest. had arguments about star dates. We had arguments.
Wow.
Patrick Stewart kept asking for his head to be pointier. When we started the Next Generation comic, he was one of the 4 actors with likeness rights, and we had to do model sheets. And once he approved Pablo Marcos's model sheets, we would still get notes from him going, "Make my head pointier, less hair." Yes, sir.
I mean, what are you going to say to that? The man's like, "Look, this is the shape of my head."
I mean, all right, this is not a note I got on any one comic, but it's one of my favorite stories. So let me tell it again.
Please.
I was at the toy fair, the annual toy show that's every February in Manhattan, for all the potential retailers to place their orders for the following Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And as a DC editor looking for the next hot license,
mm-hmm.
I'm at Toy Fair and I'm wandering around. And what do my wandering eyes come across? But the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Star Trek gear. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And I said, Paramount's going to let crossovers happen? So I rushed back to the DC offices, got a verbal go-ahead from management that I could approach Paramount about a Superman Star Trek crossover. And my licensing liaison, Paula Block, said, "Sounds interesting. I'll take it to the meeting." And she gets back to me a week or so later and says, "I'm sorry, Paramount doesn't want to cross over with the comics. There's an executive at the other end of the table who heard the pitch and said, but Superman's not real."
Jean-Luc Picard, though, 100% a historical figure, as we all know. Yeah.
Wow.
So years later, when Marvel got the license back and they got to do Star Trek X-Men, I was gnashing my teeth.
Yeah. Yes, just a few years ago, I picked up a Star Trek. It was animated Star Trek crossover with animated Transformers.
Yeah, I mean, IDW has gotten a lot of leeway that I wish I had back in the day, but they're doing nice stuff.
Yeah, it was fun. And they later had another crossover between Transformers and Ghostbusters, which was they've done a lot of, actually, boy, for a while there, IDW was doing wacky crossovers every few months. Now that I think about it.
Or they doing company-wide crossover things where G.I. Joe and the Transformers and Star Trek and Ghostbusters were all dealing with the same threat?
Yeah, it was a big goulash of licensed IPs, those kind of all mixed together, and yeah, some of it was fun.
That's the fanboy dream. Those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s always imagined, the Hulk versus Superman type arguments, right? So that in 1976, when Superman and Spider-Man finally met, it was like, oh my God, it's possible.
Yeah.
And that just opened up a floodgate that has never ended. And so a lot of these dream possibilities are fun. Are you guys familiar with the Super Team blog?
Yes.
So
kind of the amalgams, yeah.
This wacky creative genius almost every day has the Super Team family from DC Comics from the 1970s, but he would come up with the most interesting combinations of characters from across all of comics, mostly DC and Marvel, but they go beyond that. And some of them are like, you scratch your head and you go, I don't get it, but it's cool. And others are like, oh my God, this is brilliant. So that's always a pleasure. Yeah, there we go.
That's kind of a cool idea. All right, hey, you worked at DC. Maybe you could. I never got the Creeper. Can you explain this guy to me?
So, let's put this in context. So it's 1968. Steve Ditko had left Marvel. He had been working for Charlton. The Charlton stuff was not selling well. The action hero line was going away. So he comes back to DC because Dick is now editing at DC, and Ditko and Dick Giordano have a good relationship. And Ditko's like, I got a couple ideas, and it was going to be the Creeper and Hawk and Dove, and I don't remember what else he had. And Carmine was like, let's roll the dice. Let's see what happens. It's Ditko's a great artist and writer. They brought in Denny O'Neil to dialogue the Creeper under his pseudonym Sergius O'Shaughnessy, because I think even he couldn't make heads or tails out of it. I think it. This is before he got into his whole Ayn Rand, absolute good versus evil mindset. I think Ditko was exploring chaos versus conformity. So Jack Ryder, the hard-nosed reporter with an attitude, represents the system, and then he puts on this odd costume with the device in his palm that lets him change, and there he is. That's I wasn't there, but that's my best understanding.
Okay, hey, fair enough. This is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that scratched my head. It was like Our Man with Giant Man. Okay.
Yeah, Oh, okay. Doom Patrol and Captain Marvel.
But you can see how if you're a good enough comic book reader, you recognize the source material where he gets a lot of these from. Yeah, they're just fun.
Yeah, Captain America I could see him fitting with Infinity Incorporated. I had forgotten this blog existed. It's been a while since.
There's a perfect one.
Yes, yeah, it is. That's Doesn't Warner Brothers own Planet of the Apes now?
No, Disney.
No, that's still 20th, which is now Disney.
Disney.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Disney will own Warner Brothers in a few years, and they can do this.
We'll just have one movie company eventually. It'll all be Disney. We laugh, but because it's true. That's why we laugh.
I'm just looking forward to when they get down to like the D-level characters, like who people like us love, but who only appeared in my hand, like D-Man when he gets a franchise. I'm looking forward to that.
E-Man would make for wonderful, like Invincible, a great animated show on cable or streaming.
I could see that, yeah. Well, hey, I did not mean to take up so much of your time, sir, but I really appreciate you coming out.
I'm happy to chat with you guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And I appreciate you helping me shine a spotlight on my baby here.
Okay, glad to help. I don't want to cut anybody off. Chris and Chuck, do you guys have any final questions for Bob?
Thanks for coming out. It was great.
Absolutely, yes.
Happy to help.
All right, sweet. So on that happy note, folks, start checking out the BAMF podcast, and we will catch you next time.